It is 1876. Imagine a treasure that could redraw the map of America, not with gold, but with a secret knowledge centuries older than the Republic itself. A secret whispered in Lakota, buried in the dark, mineral-rich earth of the Black Hills, and protected by men who would kill to keep it from the greedy eyes of the East. This is the story of that treasure, and of the two unlikely souls, a disgraced historian and a defiant frontier scout, who risked everything to uncover a truth that history deliberately tried to forget. The Stain of the Smithsonian. The year was 1876, and for Dr. Elias Thorne, the grand centennial celebration in Philadelphia was nothing but a cruel mockery. While the nation toasted its 100 years of glorious independence, Elias sat in a small, windowless office in Washington, D.C., his world reduced to the stale smell of aging paper and the steady drip of his own shame. Elias was, or had been, the preeminent cartographical historian at the Smithsonian Institution. His meticulous work on the early Spanish and French explorations of the Mississippi Valley had earned him accolades, grants, and the quiet respect of his peers. That was before the copper relic incident. It had been a piece of junk, really. A thin, corroded sheet of hammered copper, no larger than a man's hand, found by a railroad surveyor deep in the Nebraska Territory. It had no obvious markings, yet Elias, with his historian's intuition, had been drawn to its impossible age. He had dated the copper itself to the late 15th century, decades before Columbus's documented arrival in the mainland Americas. Against the advice of the institution's senior curator, he'd published a preliminary paper, suggesting the copper fragment was part of a navigational instrument, a quadrant or a marine astrolabe, left by a pre-Columbian European landing party. The backlash was swift and brutal. The academic establishment, secure in its accepted timelines, treated his theory as a lunatic's delusion. His senior curator, a man who believed American history only began when white men decided to write it down, publicly called Elias's findings a fantasy born of vanity and poor dating methods. Within a month, Elias was quietly relieved of his position, his reputation stained with the epithet, the pre-Columbian crank. Now he was a ghost, tolerated only because he was meticulous enough to organize the Smithsonian's forgotten collection of unclassifiable oddities. This collection, stored in the dusty sub-basement, was his new realm. One humid August afternoon, while inventorying a crate labeled Western Territory Geological Survey 1875, Elias pulled out a leather-bound journal. It was small, its covers scuffed and darkened with what looked like dried mud, and something else, something reddish-brown. The spine was broken. There was no name on the cover, but inside, the handwriting was tight, frantic, and clearly not English. Elias, fluent in 5 languages and able to parse a dozen more, recognized the script immediately. 16th century Spanish, heavy with nautical jargon. The journal was the work of one Padre Mateo de la Cruz, and the first legible entry, dated 1542, St. Bartholomew's Day, began not in Mexico, but in the desolate, treeless plains of what was now the Dakota Territory. We are lost, and worse, we are led by a madness. Our captain believes the 7 cities of Cibola are not of gold, but of a different, more precious metal, a metal of knowledge. We have traveled north for 3 moons, following the old map, one drawn on hide and speaking of a black place where the gods sleep. The captain has dismissed the crown's quest for bullion. He seeks the source of the sky metal, the copper, and with it the key to the northern passage and the knowledge held by the silent, powerful people of the hills. Elias felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck. The sky metal, copper. A 16th century Spanish expedition, led by a captain obsessed not with gold, but with copper, and a black place. And in his file drawer, wrapped in tissue, lay the very object that had ruined him, the 15th century copper relic. He carefully turned the brittle pages. Padre Mateo's entries grew increasingly desperate, describing a harrowing journey, starvation, attacks by hostile tribes, and a growing, paranoid fear of their own captain, who seemed to communicate only in codes and cryptic references to astronomical alignments. The final entry, the ink smeared as if the writer had been shaking violently, was a short, terrifying cipher. They took the captain, not the men, but the silent ones. They took him to the heart. I have buried the map, and with it the truth of the passage. It is under the sign of the 4 winds and the stone that weeps. The sky metal is not the treasure. It is the key. Seek the cipher of the sun and the serpent in the heart of the Black Hills. L, Sigma, Gamma, C, M, Psi. God help us all. 1543. The shadow falls. Elias lowered the book. He was holding proof, centuries old, that a sophisticated Spanish expedition had penetrated deep into the American interior, reaching the sacred Black Hills, Paha Sapa, of the Lakota people, over 300 years before American settlers officially claimed the territory. And they had buried a map tied to an ancient knowledge and a cryptographic key, the copper cipher. This wasn't just history. It was a detonation charge under the entire narrative of American discovery. If the Spanish had been there and had sought something other than gold, what were they hiding? And what had the silent, powerful people done to the captain? A frantic knock on his door startled him. It was Mr. Abernathy, the senior curator, his face flushed with self-importance. Thorne, the director requires the complete inventory of the Western Survey Box immediately. Senator Harding is asking for details on the Black Hills geological finds. You know the treaty with the Sioux is shaky, and any talk of minerals up there is sensitive. Elias instinctively slammed the journal shut and slipped it under a stack of old ledger books. The inventory is half complete, sir. I should have it ready by... Nonsense. The senator wants it now. Move, man. We need to prove we're good stewards of the West's wealth. Abernathy's eyes swept over the dusty room, pausing for a moment on the ledger where the journal lay hidden. Elias watched him leave, his heart hammering against his ribs. The Black Hills, Senator Harding, the Sioux Treaty. The year 1876 was the year of the Great Sioux War, sparked by General Custer's official confirmation of gold in the very hills the Lakota considered their sanctuary, a direct violation of the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty. The establishment, the politicians, the military, the railroads, didn't just want gold. They wanted to seize the land. The discovery of a Spanish map proving a much older, deeper historical claim to that same land, and hinting at a treasure far greater than mere gold, would be explosive. It would give Elias the vindication he desperately craved, but it would also instantly paint a target on his back, drawing the attention of every avaricious interest group from D.C. to Deadwood. Elias knew he had a choice. He could turn the journal over to Abernathy, see his work censored and absorbed into the establishment's narrative, or he could disappear. He could follow the last desperate clues of Padre Mateo de la Cruz. He glanced at the cipher in the journal's final entry: L, Sigma, Gamma, C, M, Psi. He began to pack. He took the journal, a map of the Western Territories, a compass, and his last remaining savings. His destination was unavoidable: the chaotic, lawless heart of the 1876 gold rush. He was going to the Black Hills. He was going to find the map. And he was going to find the truth behind the copper cipher. The firebrand of dead wood. 3 weeks later, the journey was a blur of grinding trains, rough stagecoaches, and sleepless nights. Elias Thorne, clean-shaven and clad in the standard, somewhat effete wool suit of an Eastern academic, arrived in Cheyenne, Wyoming, the jumping-off point for the Black Hills Trail. His suit, his mannerisms, and the wire-rimmed spectacles perched on his nose marked him instantly as a stranger, a tenderfoot. He needed a guide, a professional, discreet, and utterly fearless individual who knew the territory and, crucially, knew the delicate, dangerous line separating the American military, the gold prospectors, and the Lakota people, whose war was now in full, terrible swing. He found her in a smoky, crowded saloon called the Rough Rider, where the air was thick with cheap whiskey and ambition. Her name was Maverick Mav Kincaid. Mav Kincaid wasn't a woman who blended in. She sat alone at a table near the back, cleaning a well-maintained, heavy-caliber Remington revolver. She was dressed in worn but practical buckskin trousers, a faded flannel shirt, and a wide-brimmed felt hat pulled low over her eyes. Her hands were scarred, her expression hard, and her striking green eyes seemed to miss nothing. She was infamous in the territory, known not just for her skill as a scout and tracker, but for her almost suicidal independence. She refused to work for the Armel or the major mining conglomerates, preferring to guide small parties of independent miners or, more often, to track stolen cattle and recover lost claims. Elias approached her table, feeling the weight of every eye in the room turned to him. He cleared his throat. "Miss Kincaid?" She didn't look up. "If you're selling Bibles, I've got one. If you're selling land, I'm already standing on it. If you're selling snake oil, the sign says no tenders." Her voice was low, gravelly, and entirely without welcome. Elias pulled out a chair and sat down without invitation. He ignored the scowl. "I am Dr. Elias Thorne. I'm a historian, and I'm here to hire you for a discreet expedition into the Black Hills, specifically the area near Bear Butte, well outside the current gold camps. I am not seeking gold." This finally made her look up. She rested the long barrel of the Remington on the table, pointing vaguely in his direction. "You look like you'd get lost following your own shadow. And everyone who goes into the hills is seeking gold. It's the only reason anyone risks a Sioux arrow." "I am seeking a piece of copper," Elias stated simply, "and a very old Spanish map. It is a historical mission. I have a journal that suggests a pre-Columbian Spanish contingent reached the interior in the mid-16th century. The copper I seek is part of an artifact they left behind. I need someone who can get me past the army checkpoints and into the unstaked territory without asking questions." Mav's mouth twitched, but it wasn't a smile. It was the precursor to a laugh, a dry, cynical puff of air. "A Spanish ghost chasing a copper coin in the middle of Custer's War? Mister, that's the craziest thing I've heard since the last preacher told me I was going to hell. Copper? The hills are exploding with $250,000 a day in placer gold. What kind of fortune could copper possibly buy you?" Elias leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. He took a risk, an immense gamble on her inherent curiosity. The journal mentions not only copper, but a connection to the Northern Passage, the Northwest Passage that the Spanish, the English, and the French have been seeking for 3 centuries. It speaks of a source of astronomical knowledge, a cipher, guarded by the Lakota people, whom the Spanish captain called the Silent, Powerful People. If this map is found, it changes everything we know about global exploration. And, more importantly, it offers a claim to that land that predates the 1868 treaty, rendering all current American gold claims invalid. He paused, watching her face carefully. For the first time, the hardness in her eyes was replaced by a flicker of something else, interest, and a deep, unexpected flash of indignation. Mav Kincaid was no friend to the U.S. Army or the mining syndicates. She had seen firsthand the destructive power of the gold rush on the land and the Native American tribes. She had a history of run-ins with military patrols, often for aiding small, beleaguered bands of Cheyenne and Lakota who were being hunted. She was a woman of the frontier who understood justice not by law, but by right. "You're saying this map gives the Lakota a weapon?" Mav observed, the Remington now resting gently on her lap. "It gives them documentation of an older truth. It gives the world a story that contradicts the greed-driven narrative being written right now in Deadwood and D.C. Elias pulled out a small, heavy purse and slid it across the table. It held a stack of $20 gold pieces, a massive sum for an academic, nearly his life savings. $200 in advance, gold. Your services for 2 weeks. All expenses paid. The goal is the Bear Butte area, specifically a geological feature known locally as the Weeping Stone or the Crying Rock. And absolutely no questions about the cipher I am using to navigate." Mav stared at the gold, then at Elias. $200 to chase a ghost in an old piece of copper? That's either the height of lunacy or the depth of conviction. I'll take it. She swept the gold into her belt pouch with practiced ease. "But understand this, Dr. Thorne. I'm not running a history tour. We see a Sioux war party, we don't try to communicate. We run or we fight. We see the U.S. cavalry, we lie or we hide. And if you try to pull any academic foolishness out there, any stalling for a sketch or a moment of quiet contemplation, I will leave you in a shallow grave for the wolves." "Understood," Elias said, a quiet thrill of genuine danger running through him. He was no longer a disgraced academic. He was an explorer, a truth seeker, allied with a firebrand. "Good. We ride at dawn. Now, tell me about this weeping stone, and tell me everything you know about this Spanish lunatic who was looking for knowledge instead of gold." As the saloon's noise faded around them, Elias began to recite the fragmented story of Padre Mateo and the captain, and the dangerous, hidden secret of the copper cipher. Into the Sacred Hills. The journey from Cheyenne to the Black Hills was a grueling passage through a land actively at war. The air was tense, punctuated by the distant rumble of potential gunfire. Mav Kincaid, true to her word, was a machine of efficiency and skill. She acquired 2 sturdy horses, supplies, rifles, and a simple, unmarked wagon, enough to appear as a pair of independent prospectors on the periphery of the gold rush. Elias, awkwardly holding a Winchester rifle for the first time, felt completely out of his element, yet strangely alive. Mav used her reputation and her knowledge of the Army's patrol routes like a master chess player. They avoided the main trails, moving instead through high, less-traveled canyons and across dry creek beds. Elias began to see the land not as a blank space on a map, but as a complex, breathing entity, full of hidden pathways and coded signs only Mav could read. "The Army is everywhere," Mav muttered one night, crouched by a fireless camp, using cold biscuits and dried meat for their meal. "They're trying to choke off the Sioux, driving them to the agencies for the winter. But the Sioux know this land better than any of our generals. We're cutting through the heart of their traditional hunting grounds. If we get close to the sacred sites, we'll be walking on borrowed time." "The black place where the gods sleep," Elias murmured, translating Padre Mateo's phrase. "It sounds exactly like the Lakota name for the Black Hills, Pahasapa." "It is, and the most sacred site is the Bear Butte area. We get close there, we'll be well out of the Army's immediate reach, but directly in the path of the Lakota warriors defending their homeland." "Why that crying stone, Doctor?" Elias pulled out a carefully drawn map he'd sketched based on the journal's references. He had cross-referenced Mateo's Spanish descriptions with modern geological surveys. Padre Mateo wrote that he buried the map under the sign of the 4 winds and the stone that weeps. The weeping stone, or the crying rock, is a localized term, but in the vicinity of Bear Butte there is a prominent granite outcrop known to pioneers as Lover's Leap. Geologically, it features a consistent flow of water appearing like tears running down a unique vertically striped rock face. It's also perfectly aligned to the 4 cardinal directions. "Lover's Leap," Mav repeated, her eyes narrowed. "That's right on the edge of the sacred ground. No one goes there but the hunters. It's too high up, too rough for a gold claim." "Perfect," Elias said. "It means the area hasn't been torn up by prospectors. It may be preserved." As they moved deeper, the lush, dark pine forests of the hills closed in on them. Elias, accustomed to the civilized order of D.C., was struck by the raw, untamed beauty. The air was crisp, scented with pine and damp earth. Mav was getting impatient. "All right, Doctor, the gold camps are behind us. We're in hostile territory now. It's time for the cipher. You said you wouldn't tell me about it until we were deep inside. What's this cryptic mess Padre Mateo wrote?" Elias took out the journal and showed her the final scribbled line. L, sigma, gamma, C, M, psi. It's a mix of Latin, Greek, and other symbols. When I first saw it, I thought it was simple substitution, but the symbols are not random. They represent something specific. They are part of a very old astronomical code, one tied to ancient navigation and charting. Elias began to explain his hypothesis. The Spanish captain was a cartographer, obsessed with the Northwest Passage. The Spanish believed that a successful sea route to the North Pole required not only nautical skill, but a mastery of celestial mechanics. The L is clearly Libra, the constellation. The C is likely Cancer or Cetus. But the others, he pointed to Sigma and Psi. Sigma is a Greek letter, often used in mathematics to denote a sum, a total alignment. But in an older Kabbalistic sense, it can represent the great synthesis, or the union of heaven and earth. And Psi, well, that's often a symbol for the psyche or spirit. But astronomically, it was sometimes used by pre-Renaissance scholars to denote the equinox point, or the celestial pole. Mav interrupted him, holding up a hand. "Slow down, Doctor. You're talking over my head. Are you telling me this isn't a password, but a set of map coordinates written in star language?" "Precisely, but not standard coordinates. These are references to a specific set of alignments needed to orient a physical map, a kind of celestial compass. The Spanish captain must have created a cipher that used the alignment of specific constellations relative to the celestial pole, Psi, during the season of the autumnal equinox, Sigma, to locate the buried map." Mav stared at him, impressed despite herself. "You're saying the captain didn't just bury the map, he buried it under a marker that only makes sense if you know the stars and the date he buried it?" "He buried it to be found by someone with the knowledge he sought, not just the shovel," Elias corrected. "And the date, Padre Mateo's final entry is dated 1543, the shadow falls, just before the autumnal equinox. So, what do we do? Wait for September 23rd, 1876 and watch the stars align?" Mav asked skeptically. "No, we find the weeping stone and we look for the physical marker. The map is buried under the sign of the alignments. It implies a physical representation, perhaps a carving, a unique stone, or a copper plaque that mirrors the celestial cipher." Elias then revealed the true centerpiece of his theory. "I believe the copper relic that ruined my career, the 15th century fragment found years ago, is the key. It's too old to be Spanish, but it fits with Mateo's account of the sky metal, the copper sought by the captain, which was a metal of knowledge. What if the Spanish didn't make the cipher? What if they found it? What if the captain's cipher is a bastardized, corrupted form of an astronomical cipher already used by the powerful people of the hills, the Lakota?" Mav froze, her green eyes wide and sharp. "You think the Sioux had a system of astronomical navigation that predates the Europeans? I think the man who wrote this journal was led into the Black Hills by a map drawn on hide, which spoke of a black place. The Lakota were and are a people who live by the stars. Their culture is built on sacred geography and celestial observation. They use winter counts, pictographic calendars that are incredibly precise. What if the Spanish captain was trying to decode an indigenous map that already held the secret of the passage? The implication was staggering. An indigenous American knowledge system capable of generating a cipher so complex it had stumped European minds for centuries, a system that predated European cartography in the American interior. The silence of the pine forest suddenly felt immense. They were standing on the precipice of a historical truth that would turn the celebrated narrative of discovery on its head. "If you're right, Doctor," Mav finally said, her voice dangerously quiet, "this isn't a history expedition. This is a theft of sacred property from a people we are actively trying to destroy. And if the Sioux catch us, they won't just scalp us, they'll make us regret we were ever born. If we recover the map, we might be able to expose the lie that led to this war," Elias countered, though he knew the nobility of his cause was a thin shield against a rifle ball. Mav sighed, picked up her rifle, and nodded towards the north. "Let's find your weeping stone. And let's pray the silent, powerful people don't decide to be noisy tonight." The Sentinel of the Summit. The next morning brought them to the base of Bear Butte, a formidable, solitary mountain that rose dramatically from the prairie, a Lakota sacred site forbidden to settlers and prospectors. They left the wagon hidden in a dense copse of ponderosa pines and continued on horseback, moving carefully through the thick brush. They located the Weeping Stone, Lover's Leap, late that afternoon. It was a spectacular sight, a massive sheer granite face riven by a vertical seam that allowed a constant, slow seepage of water. The resulting mineral streaks, reddish-brown and black, gave the appearance of a rock that had been crying for centuries. It faced due south, overlooking a breathtaking panorama of the hills. Mav dismounted, her hand immediately going to her knife. "The air is wrong. This place is too quiet." Elias felt it too. There were no birds, no small animals. A profound silence enveloped the area, a silence that felt less like peace and more like an active absence. "This is the spot," Elias whispered, pulling out Padre Mateo's journal, "under the sign of the four winds and the stone that weeps." They began a meticulous search of the immediate area around the rock face. Mav looked for signs of a disturbed grave or a cache. Elias looked for the carving, the physical representation of the cipher. L, sigma, Greek, C, M, psi. For an hour, they found nothing but centuries of erosion and rock debris. Frustration began to set in. "Mateo said I have buried the map," Elias muttered, running his hands over a smooth section of the rock. "It can't be far. The cipher must be physically present." Mav had climbed onto a nearby smaller rock formation, surveying the area. "Look here, Doctor. Not on the cliff face. Look at this." She pointed to a weathered, flat stone slab, partially embedded in the earth near the summit of the outcrop. It was clearly not a natural part of the geology. It was an altar, or perhaps a marker. On its surface, barely visible through the lichen, were faint, deeply etched carvings. Elias scrambled over to her side, his breath catching in his throat. Mav used her knife to scrape away the thick green patina of moss. What they uncovered was a breathtaking, impossible carving, a copper cipher. It wasn't the Latin-Greek jumble from the journal. This was a sophisticated, complex, circular map, an astronomical clock. In the center was a stylized spiral motif, the serpent of the cipher, which Elias instantly recognized as the Milky Way. Around this center were rings. An inner ring with 12 divisions clearly representing the months or constellations of the zodiac. A middle ring with 4 distinct clusters of stars marking the cardinal directions, the 4 winds. An outer ring intricately carved with a geometric sequence of 9 interlocking symbols. And on the stone, exactly where the water from the weeping stone would strike it during a heavy rain, was a small, unmistakable etching, a simplified, elegant symbol that was the exact, stylized twin of the L Sigma part of Padre Mateo's final cipher. "He didn't make up the cipher," Elias breathed, his voice thick with awe. "He just copied the key points he found here, translating them into the only symbols he understood. This is the original. This is the Lakota celestial map. This isn't just a carving, Nav, it's a time capsule." As Elias traced the complex geometric lines, the outer ring with the 9 symbols began to make sense. The arrangement was not random. It formed a 9-point spiral, a known system of indigenous astronomical mapping used across multiple ancient North American cultures, but never before documented this far north. "The 9 symbols, they are the key," Elias whispered. He knew the Spanish captain would have used a unique, non-European method to hide his coordinates. He took out the copper relic, the small ruined fragment that had cost him his career. He laid it gently on the stone map. The relic, which had looked like a random piece of scrap, now revealed its true purpose. The corroded edges of the fragment fit perfectly into a small recessed groove on the 9th point of the spiral. It was a key, designed to fit only one lock. The copper cipher. It was the lock and the key, Elias murmured. Mateo said the sky metal was a metal of knowledge. It wasn't a product of the expedition. It was a tool provided by the people of the hills. As the fragment settled into the recess, a faint, almost imperceptible click echoed from within the stone slab. Mav gasped, her hand moving to his shoulder. "Elias, look out!" A deep, rolling voice, speaking perfect, unaccented English, cut through the silence. "That key has been sought for 300 years, and you, Doctor, have found it with surprising speed." They spun around. Standing less than 20 yards away, framed against the darkening sky, was a man. He was tall, dressed in a mix of military-issue wool and worn buckskin, with the imposing figure of an educated woodsman. He held a high-powered sporting rifle, aimed squarely at Elias's chest. But it was his face that was startling. It was the face of a white man, but his eyes were the color of storm clouds, and his expression was a mask of cold, controlled fury. He was flanked by 2 figures, Lakota men in full war paint, armed with bows and arrows, silent and deadly. "The map of the Northern Passage belongs to the people it was stolen from, Dr. Thorne," the man said, lowering his rifle only slightly. "And I have come to reclaim it." Mav immediately drew her Remington. "Who are you, and how do you know his name?" The man didn't flinch at the sight of her weapon. His gaze was fixed on the copper fragment embedded in the stone. My name is Cain Blackwood, and I know his name because I follow history, not fame. I've been tracking every obscure paper, every dismissed historian, every lunatic theory that pointed away from the gold rush and toward the true treasure of the Black Hills. He paused, a cruel smile touching his lips. I am a historian too, Miss Kincaid. But unlike Dr. Thorne, I choose to make history, not just catalog its failures. He's not with the army, Mav hissed at Elias. He's something else, a hired gun maybe, or a claim jumper with an education. I am neither, Cain Blackwood corrected, his voice resonating with authority. I am a descendant. My family has been searching for the Lodge of the Serpent for centuries. The Spanish captain was an ancestor, and the knowledge he stole, the knowledge of the passage that would open this continent to the north, was my birthright. Blackwood took a step forward, his eyes burning with obsession. Step away from the stone, Doctor. That copper key is not yours to hold. It is the final piece of the great secret of the Black Hills. Elias stood his ground, the realization of what he held electrifying him. Blackwood was not a historian. He was an heir to the 16th century Spanish captain's obsession, a man willing to employ Lakota warriors to secure a centuries-old European claim to an indigenous secret. You speak of birthright, Blackwood, Elias retorted, finding his voice. But the copper cipher on this stone is Lakota, not Spanish. The captain's actions were theft, and your claim is simply a continued ambition. As he spoke, Elias's fingers were working frantically, discreetly pushing the copper fragment. He didn't know what the click meant, but he had a moment's chance. It will give you the map to the Northwest Passage, Doctor, Blackwood tempted, his rifle barrel glinting in the fading light. Fame, vindication, a place in history that no amount of gold can buy. We can share it. Think of the prestige, the map that changes the world. Elias gave the fragment one final decisive push. A low, grinding sound emanated from the weeping stone slab. A small, tight recess opened directly beneath the copper key, a cavity that had been invisible moments before. Inside, wrapped in what looked like desiccated tan deerskin, was a roll of paper. The map. I am not interested in your fame, Blackwood, Elias declared, reaching in and snatching the fragile package. I am interested in the truth. Then you have signed your own death warrant, Blackwood roared, dropping his pretense of civility. Kill them. Mav fired. The shot went wide, forcing Blackwood to duck behind a boulder. At the same instant, the two Lakota warriors let loose their arrows. Mav shoved Elias hard, sending him tumbling off the outcrop and down a short, steep embankment. Elias hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of him, the old brittle map clutched fiercely in his hand. He heard the thwack of an arrow hitting the rock face where his head had been seconds before. "Go, Elias! Ride!" Mav yelled from above, her Remington spitting fire repeatedly, her bullets singing off the granite. She was holding them off, covering his escape, her fearless independence now a shield. Elias struggled to his feet, dazed but uninjured. He saw his horse, spooked by the gunfire, beginning to bolt. He had the map. He had the truth. But he was alone, exposed, and hunted by a man who seemed to have combined the worst of European ambition with the ruthlessness of the frontier. He didn't hesitate. He scrambled to catch his horse. The copper cipher's secret was now out, and the chase for the greatest historical prize in America had just begun. The deerskin scroll. Elias Thorne crashed through the thick underbrush, the brittle deerskin scroll clutched to his chest. He managed to grab the reins of his bolting horse just as it reached the tree line. Above him, the sound of gunfire and shouting quickly faded into the dense pines as Mav Kincaid fought Blackwood and his men. Elias couldn't stay. He had the prize, but he had lost his ally. He mounted his horse, urging it into a desperate gallop away from the weeping stone. He rode until darkness fully enveloped the Black Hills, guided only by instinct and the necessity of distance. He finally pulled to a stop in a narrow, hidden ravine, protected by a curtain of pines and brush. Shaking and exhausted, Elias dismounted. He had escaped, but the cost was unknown. Was Mav alive? He forced himself to focus on the map. He gently unrolled the deerskin scroll by the meager light of a hidden thumb-sized lantern he carried. The deerskin was incredibly thin and surprisingly pliable for its age. The map was not what he expected. It was not a conventional European cartographic work with grids, latitudes, and compass roses. It was a fusion, a terrifyingly detailed blend of two worlds. The base layer was clearly indigenous, tanned hide, intricately drawn with pigments of earth and berry. The geography was accurate, tracing the river systems of the upper Missouri and its tributaries. But it rendered the mountains and sacred sites not with simple contours, but with symbolic representations. The Paha Sapa, Black Hills, were drawn as a massive coiling serpent. Its head pointed north, the serpent of the cipher. Superimposed upon this indigenous base, however, were fine, meticulous lines drawn in black ink, European editions. These lines created a series of astronomical and navigational guides. A latitude line, a single, unnervingly precise latitude line was drawn across the top of the map, clearly indicating the 48th parallel, a line running nearly 1,000 miles north of the Black Hills, through what would become Montana and North Dakota. A system of triangulation. 3 distinct points in the Black Hills, the Weeping Stone, his current location, the high peak of Harney Peak, and another, smaller butte, were marked with Spanish symbols and connected by precise triangles. These points formed the base of a calculated vector pointing directly north along the 48th parallel. The cipher key. At the northernmost point where the 48th parallel line intersected a stylized river system, clearly the Missouri's northern bend, a large symbol was drawn, a combination of a crescent moon and a 5-pointed star. This was the target, the final location. Elias gasped, the 48th parallel. Padre Mateo's journal had mentioned the captain was searching for the Northern Passage and the sky medal as a key to knowledge. This map was the physical proof. The Spanish captain, using an indigenous Lakota celestial knowledge system that accurately mapped the land, had calculated a route that bypassed the frozen coasts and instead suggested a feasible, non-sea-based route to the north. A land route or a river route connected to the passage, starting deep within the continent. Why copper? Elias thought, running his hand over the map. Why was the copper relic the key? Copper in the 16th century was essential for navigation. It was used to sheathe hulls, and most importantly, for precision instruments like quadrants and astrolabes. But here, the sky metal was found in the interior, in the very mineral-rich ground of the Black Hills. The Lakota, who were masters of the geography, were also masters of the stars. The Spanish captain realized the Native Americans possessed astronomical knowledge of the continent far superior to his own. He acquired the copper relic, perhaps a piece of an ancient indigenous celestial tool, and used the map it unlocked to find the true passage. The implications were monumental. If the Spanish had found a feasible inland route along the 48th parallel to the North Pacific, it meant the entire geopolitical history of North America. The French claim to Louisiana, the subsequent Lewis and Clark expedition, was built upon a foundational, centuries-old lie of ignorance. Suddenly, a realization struck Elias, tied to the cipher. He pulled out the journal again, focusing on the 5 symbols Blackwood had demanded: L, Sigma, Gamma, C, Phi. He looked at the map again. The indigenous base map clearly showed a massive spiraling geological formation near the 48th parallel mark. He recognized it from his studies, the 9-mile prairie area, known for its unique, almost artificial-looking circular mound formations. Elias connected the symbols to the map's geometry. Phi, Psi, celestial pole. The axis point of the entire map, the highest known point in the Black Hills, Harney Peak. L, Libra, and C, Cancer. Specific star alignments used to calculate the 48th parallel line. Sigma, synthesis. The intersection point, the combination of the celestial lines and the terrestrial lines. This point was the 9-mile prairie area. The map didn't just show where to go, it was the instruction manual for the final discovery. His triumphant moment was shattered by the sound of approaching horses. Blackwood. He must have used the noise of the pursuit to mask his own tracking, following Elias's less cautious trail. Elias quickly rolled the map, securing it inside his coat. He knew he couldn't outrun a skilled tracker. He needed to disappear. He remounted and rode not north toward the passage, but east, straight down the ravine, toward the dangerous, lawless hub of the gold rush, Deadwood. But why the obsession with the passage? Mav gestured to the bar, where a thick-set man with a handlebar mustache was arguing loudly over a mining claim. Gold is power, Elias, but information is destiny. This map is the geographical holy grail. If Blackwood's ancestor was the Spanish captain, then this family has been chasing the idea of a North American empire based on inland access for 300 years. Blackwood wants the prize his ancestor failed to deliver. And he's using the Lakota to find it, Elias noted bitterly, remembering the warriors. No. He's using Matotanka, Big Bear, Mav corrected, nodding toward a back room. The man who gave me the note. Matotanka is an old friend, a half Lakota tracker who works in these parts. He's the one I get information from. He said Blackwood hired a specific subgroup of Oglala, a small band of renegades who believe the only way to save their land is to use its ancient secrets against the white men who seek to claim it. Elias frowned. Blackwood is manipulating them, using their sacred history to achieve his own imperial goals. Of course he is. That's how these men operate. They find the weak spots. Greed, or in this case, a desperate hope for justice. Mav then dropped the second piece of crucial news. Matotanka told me Blackwood is heading north. He hasn't seen the map, but he knows the general area of the Serpent, the 9-mile prairie. He's taking a small, fast party up the Cheyenne River toward the 48th parallel. He believes the map's destination is a specific mound, an ancient burial site called the Lodge of the Serpent. The LIKCM Pi cipher is essentially a set of instructions to find that lodge, Elias realized. The final act of the captain was to bury the map. The final act of the map must be to lead to the actual knowledge, the passage itself. Mav put her hand on his, her grip surprisingly strong despite the injury. We need to beat him there, Elias. The Blackwood family has been waiting 3 centuries for this. We can't let him get it, not if it means selling the sacred knowledge of this land to the highest bidder. How do we beat an organized, armed expedition? Elias asked. "We go faster and we go deeper," Mav said, a dangerous light in her eyes. "We can't follow the river. We have to cut cross-country through the Badlands, a route so treacherous the cavalry avoids it. No one will expect us to ride straight through hell to get to heaven." She signaled across the room. Matotanka, a quiet man with deep, knowing eyes, immediately crossed the room and sat down beside Mav. "Matotanka says the lodge is not just a mound, Doctor," Mav translated. "It is a geological and spiritual center. It is where the Wakantanka, the great mystery, touches the earth. It is a labyrinth, and Blackwood has a key of his own." "What key?" Elias asked, wary. "Not a copper key," Matotanka said, his English slow and precise, the first time Elias had heard him speak. "A human key, a man who knows the path. He has taken Hehaka Chante, Elkhart, one of the elder keepers of the Serpent Lodge. Blackwood has captured him and is forcing him to lead the way." The stakes had just risen. It wasn't just a race for a map. It was a rescue mission for the keeper of an ancient sacred site. The journey through the Badlands. The next 3 days were a brutal test of endurance. Mav, despite her injured arm, led Elias through the desolate, sculpted landscape of the Badlands. It was a region of stark beauty and merciless terrain. Towering buttes, deep ravines, and eroded spires of yellow and red clay that shifted underfoot. They rode small, tough Mustangs that understood the treacherous footing. Elias, stripped of his academic armor, learned to rely on his physical stamina and Mav's ruthless efficiency. He learned to read the sun, ration water with painful discipline, and sleep with one eye open. Mav was a silent, grim presence. Her focus was absolute. She rarely spoke, reserving her breath for the long hours in the saddle. She taught Elias how to use his rifle not for shooting, but for warning and defense. A display of force rather than outright engagement. "If you shoot at one of Blackwood's men," she explained one evening, watching the sun cast long, impossible shadows over the striated canyons, "you buy us maybe an hour. If you scare them off with a well-placed round, you buy us confusion. We need speed, not a blood feud." Elias realized that Mav's goal was not merely survival or money. It was integrity. She was fighting to protect the spirit of the land she loved, standing against the greed she had seen ruin countless lives. While riding, Elias studied the deerskin map. He used his knowledge of historical cartography to interpret the indigenous symbols. The map was more than a guide to the passage. It was a record of the Lakota's vast geographical and astronomical knowledge. He saw symbols for migratory patterns, geological formations that suggested mineral wealth, including gold, but dwarfed by copper symbols. And, most strikingly, an enormous, stylized drawing of a solar eclipse centered over the Lodge of the Serpent. The astronomical significance was profound. The map suggested that the lodge was an observatory, a place where celestial events were recorded and used for prediction and navigation. On the evening of the third day, Mav pulled them to a stop overlooking a vast rolling plain, the edge of the high prairie. The ground was smoother here, the air cooler. "We are close to the lodge," Mav whispered, pointing toward a low, grassy mound on the horizon, perfectly circular and unnaturally symmetrical. The 9-mile prairie,
The serpent's heart. How can you be sure? Elias asked. The prairie itself is the cipher, Mav replied, scanning the surroundings. This entire area is riddled with ancient earthworks and mounds, some natural, some man-made. Look at the mound. It's the only one visible against the sunset. And it has the wrong feel. It feels like a center. As they moved toward the mound, Elias noticed a subtle yet unmistakable sign of Blackwood's passing. A small, carefully placed cairn of stones, a marker. He was here recently, Mav observed, dismounting. And he is using traditional markers. He's pretending to be part of this history, not just claiming it. They found the trail easily, fresh horse tracks leading straight to the central mound. Blackwood's group, relying on Elkhart's guidance, had not bothered to hide their passage. They're confident, Mav noted, too confident. They think they're ahead, and they know the site is remote. They reached the mound just after midnight. It was larger up close, its base nearly 100 yards across. It rose to a height of about 30 feet, topped by a few ancient, gnarled cottonwood trees. It was silent, majestic, and intimidating. "The Lodge of the Serpent," Elias breathed. Mav pointed to a shallow, man-dug trench running around the base of the mound. "They've started to dig. Blackwood must be convinced the treasure is buried here." They crept up the side of the mound, moving on their bellies until they reached the summit, where the earthworks were most pronounced. There, gathered under the cottonwoods, was Blackwood's camp. 4 men, Blackwood and his 3 hired guns, were standing over a freshly dug pit, their shovels discarded. A small fire crackled, illuminating the scene. And there was Elkhart. The Lakota elder, frail but dignified, was bound with ropes, sitting next to the pit, his face expressionless. Blackwood was shouting, his voice echoing in the still night air. "It's not here! You lied, old man! The map clearly indicated the serpent's head. This is the highest point, the center." Elkhart looked at Blackwood with calm disdain. "The Lodge of the Serpent is not a burial mound for white man's gold. It is a place of seeing. It is a place where the stars speak. You look for a treasure. I look for the truth." "The truth is whatever I say it is when I have the map and the gold," Blackwood roared, kicking a discarded shovel into the pit. "Where is the final marker, the passage?" Elias and Mav exchanged a look. This was their moment. Blackwood had the elder, but he was missing the key, the deerskin map. He was digging blind. Elias had to get closer to understand the final part of the cipher. He had the map, but the map itself only pointed to a place, not the exact mechanism. He needed to interpret the astronomical carving on the deerskin in relation to the physical arrangement of the mound. "We have to rush him," Mav whispered. "I'll take the guards. You get to the elder and the map." "No," Elias said, pointing to the mound itself. "Look at the arrangement of the cottonwood trees. 4 trees, forming the 4 points of a diamond shape. They look ancient. The 4 winds mentioned in Mateo's journal." And then he saw it. The trees were not randomly placed. They aligned with the 4 cardinal directions. And between the 2 easternmost trees, there was a shallow, circular depression, clearly man-made, that was not yet disturbed by Blackwood's frantic digging. Elias unrolled the deerskin map and whispered his realization to Mav. "The map doesn't lead to the treasure. It is a navigational device. The Serpent Lodge is an observatory. The final target, the moon and star symbol at the 48th parallel, is not buried in the mound. It's marked by the mound's celestial function. What does that mean? Mav pressed, her hand tightening on her revolver. It means the map tells us the final secret is revealed when the moon and the star are aligned above the mound. But we don't have time to wait for the alignment. We have to find the physical marker they use to record the alignment. Elias pointed to the circular depression between the two eastern trees. The map shows a circular feature at the base of the serpent's head, which is exactly where we are. The Spanish captain, using the Lakota's ancient knowledge, must have calculated the exact point where the shadow of the celestial pole, Yi, falls on the night of the equinox, Sigma. The shadow falls, Mav finished, remembering the journal entry. It's a reference to a shadow marker. Elias realized the true function of the mound. It was a gnomon, a giant sundial and star chart. The circular depression was the receiving basin, designed to hold the final artifact. Math, the final cipher, the moon and star symbol, it's down there. It's a key, just like the copper relic, but this one is meant to be opened from above.
The shadow and the star. Mav nodded, a fierce determination in her eyes. If we rush the camp, we risk the elder's life. We need a distraction. Get ready, Doctor. When I fire, you run for that spot. She then let out a sharp, high-pitched imitation of a coyote howl. It was loud, startling, and completely unnatural for the prairie silence. Blackwood instantly reacted, grabbing his rifle. "What was that? Scouts, check the perimeter." As the two hired gunmen nervously turned their backs and fanned out, Mav made her move. She stood up, drawing her Remington, and fired 2 shots in quick succession at the center of the camp. Not at Blackwood, but deliberately shattering the small oil lantern near his feet. Darkness enveloped the summit. "Damn you, Kincaid!" Blackwood screamed, knowing instantly who it was. "You'll never leave these hills alive!" In the chaos, Elias darted forward, running low to the ground. He heard the roar of Blackwood's rifle and the quick, practiced reports of Mav's return fire. She was directing them away from the elder and the target. Elias reached the shallow circular depression. He felt the cold, dry earth with his hands. It was covered by a thin layer of fine prairie dirt. He frantically clawed it away. His fingers scraped against something smooth and hard. Not stone, but polished bone or ivory. He pulled it out. It was a delicate, intricate carving, no larger than his palm. The moon and the star. It was the final cipher from the deerskin map. This was the final key, the ultimate navigational marker. Blackwood, having recovered, was now standing at the edge of the fire pit, aiming into the darkness. "Kincaid, you worthless harlot! Where is the map? Where is the doctor?" "He's right here, Blackwood," Elias shouted, standing up between the two eastern cottonwoods. He held the bone carving high. Blackwood turned, his eyes wide in surprise. Elias had lured him out of the shadows. "The moon and star," Blackwood breathed, staring at the artifact. "You fool! Give it to me. That is the final cipher. It unlocks the passage." "It doesn't unlock a passage, Blackwood," Elias corrected, his voice resonating with a sudden, profound confidence. "It is the key to an observatory. This entire mound is built to measure the cosmos. You've been digging in the ground for a buried map, when the real secret has been waiting in the stars for 300 years. As he spoke, Elias spun the bone carving in his hand. He looked at the circular depression. He realized the bone was not the map. It was the mechanism. The depression was deep enough to hold something else, something smaller. He plunged the bone carving back into the dirt, this time placing it point down into the center of the depression, like a stylus or a miniature gnomon. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out the rolled deerskin map. The passage is not in the ground, it's in the sky. He unrolled the map and, with a move Mav had taught him, used the small cottonwood trees to pin the four corners of the deerskin to the ground, aligning the map's own cardinal points precisely with the mound's markers. The bone carving, acting as a gnomon, cast a tiny, knife-edge shadow in the faint moonlight. This shadow, perfectly aligned with the moon and stars' axis, fell upon a single, startlingly bright, embedded piece of polished copper at the very center of the map. The final cipher was unlocked. The copper piece was the size of a coin, and it was the source of the sky metal. It was not a tool, it was a record. On its surface, etched in tiny, precise symbols, was a complex, interlocking set of geometric coordinates. Blackwood moved like a predator, launching himself toward the map. "Mine! It's mine!" Mav, seeing her chance, fired her last 2 rounds. One hit Blackwood's rifle, sending it spinning into the pit. The second struck his shoulder, spinning him around with a howl of pain. Elias didn't wait. He snatched the copper coin off the map and began ripping the deerskin from the ground. "Matotanka, get the elder!" Mav yelled, running toward the commotion. The remaining gunmen, panicked by the noise and Blackwood's injury, were scattering. The chaos was complete. Elias grabbed his horse, the copper coin scorching his palm with its implied knowledge. He looked at Mav, who was now cutting Elkhart's bonds with her knife. "The coordinates are on the coin! We have to go!" Elias shouted. Mav pushed the elder onto the back of Blackwood's remaining horse. "Go, I'll hold them for 5 minutes. Get the elder to the river, then ride north. Do not stop until you hit the 48th parallel." Elias knew better than to argue. Mav Kincaid had chosen her destiny. She was the sentinel of the sacred hills, and she was fighting for the truth she believed in. He turned his horse and vanished into the darkness. The precious copper coin, the true copper cipher, the single most important historical artifact in American history, safely hidden in his palm. He was no longer running from shame. He was riding for an ultimate, world-changing truth. The Code of the Sky Metal. Elias Thorne rode north for 3 days, pushing himself and his horse to the limits of endurance. With him rode Elkhart, the Lakota elder, whose stoic silence and deep knowledge of the prairie proved invaluable. They avoided all settlements, traveling mostly at night, guided by the stars and the immense, terrifying solitude of the high plains. Elkhart, despite the ordeal of his capture, was focused only on the meaning of the artifact Elias carried. "The copper coin," Elkhart said one morning, his voice raspy but calm. They had stopped beside a small spring to rest and examine the prize. "It is the Wapiya token, the token of the Helper. It was meant to guide the stars." Elias carefully held the coin. It was slightly larger than $1, surprisingly heavy, and bore an intricate, microscopic etching. He had been unable to decipher the symbols, which appeared to be a mix of geometric patterns, stellar constellations, and the recurring 9-point spiral from the Weeping Stone. The Spanish captain took the map, but he could not take the knowledge. Elkhart continued, tracing the patterns on the coin with a gentle, weathered finger. The map led him here, to the lodge. But the lodge only gives up its final secret to the one who knows how to read the star language. Elias realized his previous interpretations of the cipher were only half right. The Spanish had corrupted the cipher, but the coin held the original, undiluted knowledge. "These symbols," Elias said, pointing to a series of dots connected by radiating lines. "They look like precise stellar coordinates, but they don't conform to any known European system." "They are not for the stars of the ocean," Elkhart explained patiently. "They are for the stars of the land. They mark the points where the celestial river, the Milky Way, touches the important sacred sites on the earth. The markings are coordinates for the medicine wheel, a final place of seeing." The medicine wheel. Elias had read about the massive, ancient stone circles scattered across the northern Great Plains, used for astronomical observation and ceremonial purposes by various tribes. He had always dismissed them as purely religious sites. So, the coin is a key to a celestial map, and the medicine wheel is the final observatory. Elias pressed, a surge of adrenaline replacing his exhaustion. "Yes, and the most ancient wheel is found at the head of the serpent, on the 48th parallel, the boundary of the Great North." Elkhart's knowledge allowed Elias to finally decode the copper coin's inscriptions. Using the elders' understanding of the Lakota astronomical symbols, Elias worked for hours, transferring the complex geometric sequence onto his own modern map of the Northern Territory. The coin contained 2 sets of crucial data: a latitude-longitude pair. Hidden within the dot patterns was a set of coordinates pointing precisely to the 48th parallel and approximately 107 degrees west longitude, an incredibly remote area near the modern border of Montana and North Dakota. A date timestamp. The 9-point spiral, when overlaid with the stellar symbols, represented a precise celestial alignment, the moment of the summer solstice, suggesting the medicine wheel's final secret was only revealed during the height of the sun's power. "We have to reach the 48th parallel before the summer solstice," Elias calculated, checking his pocket watch. "It's early September. We have months, but we must reach the site and prepare. We must reach it before Blackwood," Elkhart warned, his gaze sweeping the horizon. "He may be wounded, but he will not stop. He will follow the line of the old map he saw, and he will follow the path of the wounded white scout." Elias's heart twisted at the thought of Mav. He focused on the immediate task. "We are heading toward the heart of the buffalo country. We need to move even faster." The ambush at the river bend. As they traveled, the territory became increasingly dangerous. They were moving out of the established gold routes and into the contested lands of the Northern Cheyenne and Crow tribes. They were also approaching the sphere of influence of the Canadian fur trading companies who operated in the far north and guarded their secrets fiercely. On the 5th night, as they attempted a crossing of the Little Missouri River, the danger finally materialized. They were ambushed, not by Blackwood's but by a detachment of the United States Cavalry, 7th Regiment, alerted by Blackwood's fabricated warrant. "Halt! You, the man in the suit! You are under arrest for the theft of federal property!" The captain of the detachment, a young, eager officer named Lieutenant Harrison, shouted, his rifle aimed. Elias instinctively went for the copper coin, hiding it in his boot heel. "I am a civilian, Lieutenant, and these charges are false," Elias shouted back, raising his hands. Harrison, however, was focused on Elkhart. "And the hostile with him. You are violating the agency treaty. Bring them both in." As the troopers advanced, Elkhart, with startling speed and agility for his age, threw a handful of dried buffalo dung into the embers of their small fire. The sudden burst of smoke and light blinded the advancing troopers for a crucial moment. "Run! The river!" Elkhart yelled in Lakota, seizing Elias's arm. They plunged into the frigid, fast-moving river. The cavalry opened fire. Water erupted around them. Elias felt a searing pain in his shoulder, a grazing bullet that spun him around in the current. Elkhart pulled Elias, half drowned and bleeding, onto the far bank, scrambling into the thick cottonwood grove. They couldn't take the horses. They had to rely on stealth. "The copper coin, it is safe?" Elkhart asked urgently, ignoring the gunfire. "Safe," Elias managed, clutching his throbbing shoulder. "Then we run. We follow the shadows. They will expect us to stay close to the water. We go into the hills," Elkhart commanded. They spent the night running and hiding, driven by the drumbeat of pursuing horses. Elias, weakened by the shoulder wound, relied heavily on the elder's uncanny ability to move unseen through the tangled undergrowth. As dawn broke, they found a small, protected cave high up a bluff. Elkhart, without a word, began to treat Elias's wound with surprising surgical precision, using chewed willow bark and shredded cotton torn from Elias's shirt. "They will stop when the sun is high," Elkhart predicted. "They do not know this land. They are afraid of the shadows." Elias lay against the cool cave wall, the adrenaline fading, leaving him cold and fearful. He had escaped the establishment, survived Blackwood, and now was a hunted criminal in the eyes of the U.S. Army. "Blackwood is not just a greedy man, Elkhart," Elias whispered, staring at the wound. "He is using the whole weight of the government against us. He framed me perfectly." "A man who seeks to destroy sacred things is never satisfied with only one enemy," Elkhart said simply. "We must reach the medicine wheel. The coin's power is revealed there. It will be our only defense." As they rested, Elias pulled out the copper coin again. He focused his mind, channeling his historian's meticulousness into the complex stellar map etched on the surface. He felt a profound connection to the knowledge it contained, a link between the ancient world and his modern desperation. He realized the true, terrifying complexity of the coin. It was not just coordinates for the medicine wheel. It was a key that suggested the passage was not merely a river or a path, but a system of transportation tied to the indigenous knowledge of the Earth's mineral properties. The recurring copper motifs suggested that the sky metal was not just a symbol, but a conductor. Could the Spanish captain have been looking not for a passage through the continent, but for a passage on the continent? A fast route utilizing the Earth's magnetic forces? The thought was astronomical, bordering on alchemy. Elias had to reach the medicine wheel.